Hello all! Rick here, yesterday with a video for next last fortnight to come. Time travel is weird and causes all sorts of problems, paradoxes and issues in any science fiction franchise. This is why Starfleet and the Federation have a standing order not to interfere in the timelines where possible, akin to the Prime Directive. By the 31st century, time travel was common, but followed a strict set of regulations. But after the temporal Cold War, it was simply outlawed altogether, barring accidents. But I'm not here to talk about those today. Instead, let's look at 10 methods of time travel employed by Starfleet and the pros and cons of these select few. Starting with 6th, we have the Slingshot method. This involves flying a vessel at near luminal speeds towards a high gravity object. A star often suffices, but theoretically anything with a significant pull would do. You basically speed the ship towards its gravity well and build momentum, catching it at such an angle as to orbit around the object, gaining more momentum before breaking away at a faster speed than you approached. This method can be used to travel both forwards and backwards in time, but there are all sorts of subspace equations and variables that have to be taken into account when trying this, and it's not always guaranteed to work. If the maths is off, then you can end up way off target at best, or flying apart or into a star at worst. It's a messy and unsubtle way to jump through time, with a rather large margin for error, but for a while it was the most practical way Starfleet knew of, sanctioning several research missions in the 23rd century using this method. At 7th, we have the Bajoran Orb of Time. The orbs are relics of the prophets of wormhole aliens, beings that persist in a realm beyond time, accessible through the Bajoran wormhole. While all the orbs can grant visions into the future and past, usually guided by the viewer's meditations or direct innovation by the prophets, so far the Orb of Time is the only one to demonstrate the ability to actually transport matter through time. In 2373, the orb was used to send the USS Defiant and crew back to 2268 during an attempt to assassinate Captain James Kirk. This method of time travel is strictly overseen by the Vedic Assembly in partnership with the Federation's Department of Temporal Investigations, and while its cultural significance to Bajor means that access to it cannot be completely redacted, there are laws in play to protect it from misuse. It is also highly subjective to the user's whim, and there is no guarantee it will even do anything. At number 1, we have the Borg's temporal vortex technology. It's unclear which species they assimilated to get this from, but it's an ace in the hole for the Borg. The Borg develop through assimilation and the absorption of technologies through advanced cultures. The more tech-savvy the culture is, the better the pickings for the Borg. But push them too much, and the collective might just decide that your species is not worth the effort of assimilating and just go back in time to stop you from ever having existed in the first place. And assimilate your homeworld as a bonus for the added drones while they're at it. This technology was among some of the most advanced Borg stuff they ever displayed, being both accurate, transportable, and rapid. There weren't many downsides to it, except that, it's in the hands of the Borg, so good luck obtaining it. At 3rd, we have Project Daedalus, as it was known, the Red Angel suit. This was a personal time travel suit designed in secret by Section 31 that sort of worked. Only one prototype was created, and for security it was biometrically sealed to work only with Gabriel Burnham and her lineage. It also required the use of time crystals to work, a form of natural lattice that generated strong temporal effects. The suit would use this to open a small micro wormhole, and then tether itself to its starting point in order to keep the wormhole stable. With lots of calculations, time travel was possible with it, but only for limited periods, before the tether would snap taut and bring the suit and pilot back to their starting point. It was less time travelling, and more a time bungee. It was also very delicate, but with some tinkering, could be used to open a temporal rift. In 2nd place, we have the Chrono Deflector. This was actually developed by a Klingon scientist called Korath around the early 25th century, but one obtained and used at one time by Starfleet. The deflector was akin to the Borg's own Vortex technology, as it opened a rift with intense tachyon emissions. This device was accurate, and it functioned perfectly for one time only. The downside of its use was that the level of radiation it generated was so intense that it would burn itself out, meaning that a temporal rift to a specific point could be generated, but after the ship passed through, there was nothing to keep it open or open a new one, so it was a one-way trip. At 10th place, we have the Temporal Transporters in use by Starfleet of the 29th century, and present on vessels such as the Wells-class USS Relativity. These belonged to the Temporal Integrity Commission, and could pinpoint an exact location in time and space before beaming a person to that point. However, this came with side effects known as temporal psychosis. While this transporter was effective, repeated use would culminate in sensory aphasia, followed by delusional behaviour and finally death, as the mind struggled with adjusting to the varying timelines. For this reason, temporal operatives from this era preferred to recruit temporary operatives from the timelines they were investigating, so they could limit their number of transporter trips. If needs must, the ships themselves could activate a temporal core and jump through time as well. 9th. In a similar vein to the Temporal Transporter, and perhaps even its precursor, we have the Chronoton-infused transportation. In this event, a myriad of factors need to come into play. Firstly, the transporter beam needs to be passing through a high level of chronoton particles that move through time the wrong way. Then those particles need to be activated by a nearby temporal surge from something like a singularity. The outcome of these events occurring at the same time has the transporter beam sent through time along with the chronoton particles, rematerializing the transported individuals in the correct place but at the wrong time. This was seen in 2371, again with the USS Defiant, accidentally sending an away team back to 2024 when the Earth was in a dire situation. Good job Star Trek's all made up, right? At 4th place, we have a method of time travel that was also discovered by accident, but one that was eventually used to the benefit of those involved. Like temporal psychosis, this one too had side effects, the degradation of the nervous system with repeated jumps, and associated lightheadedness and weakness. Basically, a body can be flooded with Delta series radioisotopes and then exposed to Tetrion emissions. Tetrions are subspace particles, and subspace is strange, but the effect has a person teleported physically from their current moment to a point and proximity in their own future timeline. From there, they have a couple of seconds, minutes maybe, where they exist twice in that future timeframe before the effect wears off and the individual is brought back to the very instant they left in the first place. For an observer, the time traveller appears not to have moved at all, but in an instant they would have explored a potential future timeline. The downside is the aforementioned nerve damage, which is ultimately lethal. At 8th place, we have the use of red matter to produce a singularity. This device was a creation of the Vulcan Science Institute and would lead to a runaway reaction, generating intense gravitational forces until a black hole was formed. However, this black hole was different from regular ones, as although it did indeed have a strong pull from which not even light could seemingly escape, it also created a passage back in time. This seems to be an infrequent event, however, as in 2387 the Romulan supernova led to the Narada interfering with Spock's science vessel which had deployed the red matter, and the resulting black hole pulled both vessels mostly back to 2233. Subsequent uses of the matter, however, never recreated this effect, suggesting that there were other plot-convenient factors at play here too. Nevertheless, red matter remains a known substance to Starfleet, and experimentation on this would be possible in the future. The downside is quite simply the sheer destructive potential the substance has, and the seeming random factor to its use in a temporal capacity. Finally, at 5th, we have the simple and good old warp core itself. These devices work by bending space-time in a controlled fashion and are the backbone of many interstellar powers. But, in properly tuned, it can cause a myriad of space-time phenomena, including but not limited to accidental wormholes, subspace rifts, or forced mutation of organic life. In several instances across numerous ships, Starfleet and not, faulty warp cores have led to ships being flung through time as well as space. This is probably partially down to the fact that without the proper manipulation of subspace, relativity rears its head at the faster than light speeds, throws a tantrum about light speed vacuums in time, before flinging the unlucky vessel through time. Needless to say, this is not an ideal method of time travel, as warp drive is designed expressly to try to avoid instances like that. So when they do occur, they are often violent and unpredictable. So there we go. That was 10 methods of time travel used by Starfleet and their upshots and downsides. There are many others I could have mentioned, but many of these involve things like finding a temporal anomaly and saying a Hail Mary and flying into it. But such discoveries are not consistent and recreatable. Equally, there is always the option of pestering a queue to teleport you wherever, but again not exactly reliable. This is also why I left out the Guardian of Forever. For a stable method as it is, it has a mind of its own and is capable of relocating itself if it doesn't want to be used. Many of these also involve some form of damage to the traveller, something that I want to do a separate smaller video on at some point. But until then, thanks for watching this video on methods of time travel. I will be Rick. Thanks again, and hello.